Here we are. Hello. Hello and welcome to the Pixel Professor podcast, where we take an academic deep dive into the cultural and artistic phenomenon that is video games. It is April 14th, 2024, and I'm Iraq Tenor, and I'm joined by...
Swyphd, and you can call me Swyphd.
Swyphd, the alter ego of Flash, as we've determined, as in Batman, new Batman villain. And Flash is the DC universe, right? So yeah, we're good to go. We're good to go. Yep. So first question, I guess, is what are you playing / watching / reading? What do you recommend, not recommend? What media are you consuming?
You know, Raven's Watch is this roguelike game, which, as you know,
we've learned about,
means it's like the game Rogue. And it's pretty amazing.
Have you played it some more since we played it?
I have.
Man, I haven't had a chance to yet. It's so good.
It is really good. The art is amazing. I mean, I wish that somebody had told me about roguelikes before now.
Yeah, if only.
That it's impossible to have heard about them before, but but you're welcome for cluing you in on them.
Yeah, now that I know, I'll never forget.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah.
And this is multiplayer, so I get to, we get to die together.
We do. It's the perfect size too. Like the 4-person. There's 4 people in our regular gaming party, and it's a 4-person party. I got to be the Pied Piper, and he looks like a thinner version of me. I think he's like bald,
slightly worse at music.
Slightly worse. He does. The musical terms are like are correct.
Yeah.
And I've heard music that was bad enough to almost kill you. So I think there's some accuracy. Though his music's good enough to kill demons and stuff. And he's the Pied Piper, so he has those like rats that he brings around and that explode when they're attacking demons and stuff.
That's probably the most realistic thing for a musician.
Yeah. Like they play there's certain frequencies and stuff that you play, and then rats blow up
that make vermin attack your enemies. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, what better description of opera is there?
Oh dear. Well, if any of my opera colleagues end up watching this, just know that these are not the official feelings of the Pixel Professor podcast that opera would kill vermin. Actually, maybe it should be, because we're making the world a better place. I don't know.
I mean, here's the thing. Would the Black Plague had happened if we had more opera people?
That's opera people. First of all, I love that description of opera people. Yes, opera. Well, would the Black Plague have happened if we had more opera people? I don't know. It came, but basically,
performers and viewers. I'm grouping everybody, like, just opera as a whole.
It's true. As an art form, it came after, and there have been no, as far as I know, any at least bubonic plague level plague since then. We couldn't stop COVID.
Coincidence? I think not.
I don't think so either. Good call. Anything else? What else are you playing, watching, reading?
Opera people.
Tune in, and this is for this very reason. They know it because Kunstwerk is because of Wagner.
See,
right? So they're a target audience, man. I do know a lot of opera singers, interestingly enough, who play video games. Coincidence? Think not. Opera People, FTW.
Pixel Professor Podcast, brought to you by Opera People.
An opera person.
Yeah, well, that's true.
You could sing. I bet you could sing opera. I've never heard you sing.
I could listen to opera. That makes me an opera person.
True, actually. True. We need listeners, too. Anything else?
So what are you?
What am I? Okay, me. We just talked about it, and I think you probably need to talk a little more into your mic.
Okay.
You mean you don't drink into your mic, because no one wants to hear that, because drinking. See, the sound of the clinky can is fine. Anyway, I just finished binge watching Fallout, which is kind of perfect timing because we've at least mentioned it, and here we are talking about Bethesda games, of course, and we've mentioned Fallout, and now Amazon Prime just released the full season, thank goodness, of Fallout, and it is, in my humble opinion, the best video game adaptation made so far. And we've actually had some good ones. They were really bad. Like the worst one ever was in the 90s did you see that Mario Brothers movie with Bob Hoskins? And he's a great actor, and he was Mario. It was so bad. Did you see that one? Oh, yeah, it was a rough time. and it did not do justice. But the new Mario Brothers movie, I think, was very good. Did you see the new one?
Didn't see that one. Didn't see that one.
Dude, what are you doing?
I don't know.
I
don't know.
You're just playing Chex Blast or whatever that was.
Chex Quest. That's true.
That's what you do the whole time instead.
That's true.
Oh, dude. Mario Brothers, we need to watch this one. It's really good. We need to have a viewing party or something. Jack Black as Bowser was a wonderful casting choice.
That's pretty smart. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just really good.
Have you watched The Last of Us?
Yes.
And
also,
you would say Fallout?
I still think Fallout's...
Oh, interesting.
Last of Us is phenomenal, and I love the casting in that one as well. So they're probably tied-ish, but Fallout does a few things. We were just talking about this before we started recording. Fallout does a few things to, like, not just adapt it cinematically, but to still sort of make it feel like the video game, or move like the video game in a way that, because it's trying to make choices. Ultimately, the big difference, of course, and we're kind of going to encounter this, maybe not today, but next time, when we talk about like the motivators of a video game. That is the big difference between cinema and games, right? Like, you can't make choices, even though Netflix did try interactive streaming and didn't really take, because it doesn't really work the same way. But when you have to make the choices for the characters, it's hard to make it feel like a video game. But the way they move the narrative, and it's by the creator. Did you ever watch Westworld? Did you ever watch that HBO series?
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of that show.
It's by those creators, and I love Westworld. Westworld does get is this a good thing to say? I feel like Westworld gets a little bit too clever for its own good sometimes. And it was easy to get lost in all of the narrative points and stuff. But I thought it was wonderful storytelling. Those guys, armed with the story that is Fallout, it just, again, it feels like each one of the characters are video game characters going through the world making video game style choices. Even like some of the dialogue feels like the kind of dialogue that would be an option when you click through in a Fallout game. It just feels like a cinematic version of a video game. I mean, the production value is phenomenal and the casting is great. The music, oh my gosh. So I'm going to say his name wrong. I need to look up his name, but I've been listening to him for years. The guy who wrote the music for Fallout is Einon Zur, I think is how you say his name. It's a really interesting name, and I know nothing about him. And he's someone that, now that we're going to talk about Jeremy Soule today, I need to know more about him because I love his work. But Fallout, the theme that he wrote for Fallout is just one of my favorites. It's a really simple, but it fits theme, but it really fits the narrative style of Fallout. And they have a different composer who's doing the series. And of course, Fallout's famous for having sort of 40s, 50s style doo-wop and other like big band jazz and stuff going on in the background. It's such a cool aesthetic. It's that postmodern mid-century aesthetic for the deco, and that's one of my favorite things about the game, and for the audio. But often overlooked, I think, is the score to Fallout as well. And there's a moment, for anybody who loves the actual Fallout score, there's a moment in the narrative. I was worried the new composer wasn't going to use the actual Fallout theme because it's a different composer, and because they were just going to double down on the oldies music aesthetic. And then he does it, and the moment he chose to do it blew my mind. It was just so good, and it needs to be talked about, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about it. But anyway, this is more I was going to talk about Fallout. But it's just, I think, now, don't let your kids watch it. It's extremely gory. It's also really intense. One of the things that Fallout does particularly well, and this is different than the Elder Scrolls series, is it has this sort of dark comedic element. It goes super deep on some political issues, including race and capitalism and its dangers and benefits, and there's a whole like capitalism versus communism part of this narrative. I think when the game came out in the 90s, all of that was still fresh enough in our minds, and in this case, it's like America versus China, and that's a running narrative that leads to the end of the world, that leads to Fallout, but both sides are kind of equally guilty. Anyway, I won't give any spoilers, but Anyway, it deals with some deep things, and then on a personal level, like impossible moral, often family-driven choices, and those show up in the game. Anyway, I mean, and in the series, it's just I could talk. This whole podcast could be about that, so we probably need to. But it's just
we need an episode or two about it. I think
at least, and specifically on we need to talk about video game to movie adaptations. Like do some analysis on some comparing and contrasting, and maybe this opens up the doors for something like this. I've got to believe they're thinking the same thing for like Skyrim, or maybe they do something like they're doing with Fallout. Is actually set in a new city, which a lot of us thought was going to be the city choice for Fallout 5, and that's Los Angeles. And I don't know if that's still going to be what they do, but instead they set the series in Los Angeles, and so maybe they choose to. But each one of this, of course, the Elder Scrolls thing is also in a different region of Tamriel. But anyway, it's so good. Again, I just finished it this morning, and I just already want to watch it again. And I'm already watching all the YouTube videos I can find about it, doing an analysis on it, and it's just, it's so good.
If only there were a word for when art is like, I don't know, like total art
total
is totally
complete.
Total complete. Yeah, something like
if
that.
there were a word, it would have to be German, because there's no way to squeeze together that many ideas into one word than in German.
You just squeeze together all the words,
which is what they do. Which is what is the. It's even though Legos come from Denmark, Germany is a Lego language.
They were inspired by the language strategies of their neighbors.
Yes, they're all. It's all
three doors down.
They're neighbors. Yeah, they're all neighbors, and it's all Germanic languages. There's similarities. So anyway, well, that's a great segue, which I'm sure you're doing on purpose, because we need to get to work here, because we have a lot to do. And I've tried to choose a more manageable bite of this Skyrim pie to take today. This is going to take several episodes, at least one more after this one. I totally underestimated how much there was to say about just this one game, and I just love this idea that we're going to be able to do this on other games in other ways. So we're going to continue to dive into this Gesamtkunstwerk idea of Skyrim. We mostly focus on, I'm going to get ahead of myself, which I often do because I get too excited. Let's see, I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to share my screen, which to our listeners, I'm sure you're all excited to hear. Okay, there it is. And slideshow. There's that. I just like this first image.
I like that you decided to share a picture of you.
Yes, exactly. That's definitely me. And
when are you
cosplaying as Dragonborn?
When are you going to start using art from the game?
Maybe never. Maybe every one of these slides will just me doing different cosplay Skyrim things.
That was last Thursday.
That's a little gross.
After your run. You got back. Someone grabbed
that
the picture.
brief moment. And the fog effects. My 11-year-old to turn on the fog machine, and she's like, "Dad, can I go play?" And you're like, "No, we got to get this right." Yes, this is
3
so
more
important.
pictures, and then you can.
So just a overview of the framework that we're using for analysis. This is the part that we're just such nerds. I just love thinking about how to think about things, not just the thinking about them themselves, but thinking about how to think about things. And this is our guiding framework for thinking about video games as Gesamtkunstwerk, and going through the presentation elements, which is what we're going to finish up on, I hope, today, and then motivators, the input/UI system, the feedback the game gives you, and then social elements. Those are the 5 things we're going to analyze. And within each of those, in the presentation part of it, this is where we take a pretty cinematic view on video games. We're talking about the visuals, the dialogue, sound effects, and music. So basically, the last episode was all about the visual aspects of it. So definitely listen to that first if you haven't listened to it. And hopefully the video turns out that one will actually be coming out this week. But that's the idea, is that we went into everything from the concept art to the engine itself that they used, the creation engine that they used, and what those are like, and a little bit of the history of graphics as well, all of which could be topics on their own. for podcasts. But the main case we're making today, and this was the case that we made last time as well, is that creativity is facilitated by advances in technology, right? So artists have imagination, they have a vision for what they want, and then normally there's a limitation set on those artists, whether if it was back in the Renaissance and they didn't have any limitation of color or pigment anymore, but they couldn't make images that move, or whether or not it's early 20th century, we can now make images that move, but we can't add sound yet, right? We can't actually have our characters speak. And it's amazing to think that's only 100 years ago. It was just about exactly 100 years ago when, on a larger scale, people could speak in film. To think where we are now in just 100 years is actually mind-boggling. That now we're talking about your ability to play a character that doesn't really exist, and they can speak. And it's all graphically generated through ones and zeros and creative engines and things like that. So ultimately, we were talking about this when it comes to Fallout. This series is a great example, I think, of how, and we're going to talk about this at the end a little bit as well, how the film world, the streaming world in terms of production value has some tools that the video game world doesn't quite have access to because of limits in processing power. But it sure feels like those two worlds are about to basically catch up completely with each other. And it won't be too much longer until we're playing a game that looks and sounds exactly like the production value of the Fallout series. We're actually already pretty darn close. But and then once that happens, my question for you will be, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, what's next in this Gesamtkunstwerk journey? Who knows? But it's really exciting to think about, considering how we've been on this warp speed journey in the last 100 years in terms of creativity. So a little bit of background about that journey on the video game and music and sound side. Again, this is talk about warp speed. In the beginning, basically we are controlled by ones and zeros, right? And what beeps and boops the cards themselves can make, right? And they're very, very limited in the sounds that they can make, but you can program in a specific frequency of beep or boop, right? 1978 Space Invaders, I still remember this game, arcade level and on the Atari, and that was such a huge popular game, is the first game that has this continuously looping soundtrack, mostly just this sort of single melody line. You couldn't have more than one sound at a time, and there's issues with like having to share, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, like share audio tracks with your sound effects, and you couldn't have both going at the same time. That comes later. But it's in the early 80s. MIDI gets integrated into an actual sound card. So MIDI, I don't know if you've probably heard of MIDI before. Maybe our audience has heard of MIDI. MIDI was simply a way of standardizing sort of a controller set for audio. So I could tell any sound card or any computer equipped with MIDI had built into it, if I tell you to play channel number or instrument number 6, that's going to be blank instrument on whatever card this is played with. So I know that it's going to be some kind of synthetic violin sound if I have you play this melody on this with this channel. And that was standardized throughout. Now the sounds for each, as technology increased, got better and better and better, but it was still the same sort of controller. It was all MIDI. It was a way of standardizing, so that at least I knew I had some ability to count on a little bit of quality control on the back end, which is always the biggest issue with sound. Sound is particularly suffers, and always has, when it comes to creation versus delivery, and that even goes for just in the system itself. CDs are a great example. CDs come out or become big right in the 1990s. We're talking about not compressed, completely digital, no pops or anything like you would have in cassette tapes or records. It's it's really the pinnacle of sound quality, the digital CD. Like lasers are reading these things, and there's no lost sound at all. But then you play them through a tiny Walkman or like a boombox even, and no matter how hard that poor engineer worked on the recording side, you're limited by what's going to happen on the production side or the acoustic side, because ultimately every sound has to become acoustic somewhere. Even if you're wearing AirPods Pro or something, there has to be sound waves that are interacting with your ears that are moving through the air, right? And that's the stage where it almost always goes wrong. Where sound suffers. And that's why you can go to a movie theater and those poor composers and sound designers who make these wonderful, incredible... It's like going to watch Dune on your phone through the phone speakers. I've just got to believe that any actual creator of sound design and all of that just watches somebody watch it on their speaker and just is like, you have no idea, you are destroying that art that I worked so hard to create. It's just coming through these two little tiny stereo speakers, even though those have come a long way in their sound quality. Like what I can watch through my iPad is pretty amazing. But anyway, I digress, as I do all the time. But that's just the general thing is sound is tough, and it's tough once it gets out the speakers, and it's been tough for a long time. Video games have actually been responsible for a lot of the, especially digital sound itself has been, that whole world has been responsible for so many advances in sound technology, because now basically Hans Zimmer can create a whole orchestra without ever needing a single player, right? Because their sampling abilities have come so far. Anyway, 1985, big time, Nintendo Entertainment System comes out with 5 channels. Instead of just the one that has to be shared with everything. And that means you can have the cool Mario Brothers sound effects to go with Koji Kondo's incredible score, which still stands as one of the greatest video game scores of all time. Who doesn't know? All right, turn this up. It's just so good. And how he's using beeps and boops and simple samples. Ugh. It's just pure art, man. It's just all
so
synthetic sound.
So
it's
good.
all MIDI controlled synthetic sound, and yet he's got basically sound effects for a bass and for the drum and he's just this incredible. Again, we'll have to do an episode on him. He's just, every Nintendo theme that has ever gotten stuck in your head is by this guy. Like, he's just a rock star, and he's one of the most humble, unassuming guys ever. He's just sitting there making music. Oops. Listen to this for the rest of the day. So anyway, they 5 channels. I need to zoom through the rest of this because it takes too long. 4th generation consoles come out in 1987. Now we've got 16-bit samples, which means 10 channels, and all 10 of those channels are in stereo. So it didn't take that long for us to suddenly have a whole new technological world that we could feed into with great scores. By 1993, 5th generation consoles, we get to 32-bit technology, which allows us now, in terms of processing power, to be able to actually stream real music. And so it's really in 1993 that we can finally use scores, actual musical scores in our video games.
Not just beeps and boops.
That's right. Like in the early days of MP3 technology, these are really hyper condensed, right? So they do not sound good. It's like the early days of records, right? Those early initial recordings did not sound good because you were so limited by microphone technology. Now we're limited just by processing power, right? An actual file that's not compressed with, like, you just pull a file off of a CD, for example, that's lossless, is a massive file, especially in 1993. And there's no way you could fit other information. So what this whole compression technology is one of the great accomplishments in musical art, because of compression technology and how far it's come, that allows us to have what was initially the iPod podcast, right? Because it was played on your iPod, that allowed for you to be able to listen to a whole hard drive's worth of music instead of those files being so big. Does that make sense? And incidentally, if I ever anything that I'm saying that has, please stop me at any time with questions because I'll just go. But ultimately, early compression technology made it so we could have scores, but they didn't sound great through the game itself. Does that make sense?
Had scores, but they didn't sound great.
They didn't sound great. So full
okay.
scores, but you had to basically the initial
compressed.
objective of compressing a sound, compressing audio, was to get rid of all the space around the actual musical information. Right? And to be able to do that and have it not sound tinny and canned. And in early days of compression technology, that also meant infringing on some of the harmonic spectrum of some of the instruments as well. So it meant the sound that actually ends up coming through in the end is thinner, sometimes sounds a little distorted. The actual product that was recorded, which you can get CDs for and you can find it on Apple Music and on Spotify, is phenomenal. But when it comes through in the game, it doesn't sound great.
But compared to the NES Nintendo theme song,
yes,
it's a whole variety of things that you couldn't get before.
That's right. And the difference as well is instead of coming from a sound card that's being controlled by programming that is telling which beeps and boops to play from which channels, this is just telling it play this track now. Right? That now the control is a compressed file sitting on there of recorded music. Does that make sense? The difference between those two things. So anyway, Dark Wizard is sort of credited with being the first fully orchestral score. It was created by a team of composers. The Jeremy Soul's first work is this 1997 Total Annihilation score. It's so good. Jeremy Soul's someone that we could talk a lot about too, and we won't get to talk about him, I'm sure, near as much as I'd like to. But just to get an early sample of Total Annihilation was one of those real-time strategy games back in 1997, overhead sort of warfare playing, and this was the score that played in the background as you played. Well, and there was an opening scene and all that other kind of stuff with these different scores. But just to get a sample of some of Jeremy Soul's early video game work, this one's pretty cool. This is I think the main theme, the Total Annihilation. Did you ever play this game, by the way?
I didn't.
I don't think I played this one either. The one I played a lot of was Command and Conquer. Did you ever play that one? Real-time strategy game. It was a more popular one.
I don't think I played that one. Wasn't there... Oh, no, that wasn't the board game. I'm thinking of Axis and Allies. So no, I haven't
great game.
Played that one.
Great game, too. One of the ones... The one that probably got most popular, and this would be something to dig into, was the Warcraft series, which before World of Warcraft was real-time strategy, right? Warcraft 3 being the... at least from what I remember, the biggest one and most popular one. Still a great game.
And then StarCraft, which
StarCraft.
is still around in competitive
in esports, right?
Yeah.
So here's a little sample of Jeremy Soul's Total Annihilation.
Epic.
Anyway, I'll zoom that out. I can listen to this whole thing. It's really cool. It's worth digging around and listening to the whole score. It's recorded the same way any of those big scores being written in the 1990s, which is kind of a golden age in soundtracks. This is when people like John Williams and James Horner and Alan Silvestri and even Hans Zimmer were at the height of that style of soundtrack composition power, where it's this linear storytelling, and you're telling stories like Indiana Jones and Back to the Future. I mean, that was all a lot of that was in the 80s as well, but in the 90s, that in terms of our ability to write that kind of music, it's all over the place. And it's this very neo-romantic style, heavily influenced, just like it had been in the early days of cinema, by Wagner, the Gesamtkunstwerk guy himself. Like, it's big brass and large orchestras, and there's a choir in the background, and it's large epic scale scoring, which in many ways goes away. And this isn't a history of music podcast, at least not yet. We can talk about the actual artistic influences of the music of the day on soundtracks and how that influences video game composition. But it should be said, in this era and in the early 2000s, soundtrack music is this. It sounds like this. Big fanfares, lots of strings. It sounds like the kind of thing that would be written into an opera in the late 19th century, or into a symphony, like a tone poem kind of thing. So, but heavily compressed onto a chip, onto a little, like onto some kind of a storage device, either on a console or onto a sound card. Not necessarily the sound card itself. The sound card would have had other. I'm going to talk in circles. There's so much cool technology going on. Anyway, but it's that kind of a sound. That's the main message is we are now empowered to write big scores, which is what paves the way for a guy like Jeremy Soule to step into this gap and create on a much larger scale. This is also the time in the turn of this century when we get to like, and I probably should have actually even put, what happened there? Why did it come here? What is it doing? Probably should even talk about Lord of the Rings and the influence of Howard Shore's score of Lord of the Rings on the whole world. That whole combination, that combo pack of high fantasy, orchestral scoring. It's just the soil is ready for a big, epic, realistic game like Skyrim. And this is the last technological ingredient that makes Skyrim's score and this sort of the timing of Skyrim, the Skyrim score so pinnacle, comes from this company, Dolby Digital, or Dolby itself. And what's so fun, Dolby has been at the forefront of every major audio technological contribution in the last, I don't know how many years. My cat just knocked my mouse down.
Seems appropriate.
Seems like perfect podcasting from real life here. Anyway, so Dolby Digital, this generation of consoles that we've talked about, that is the generation that Skyrim is a part of. And again, it's important to note that even though for me and for many others, these games are ones that we play on PCs, their ability to release a certain level of game is determined by what the consoles can do, right? They were even talking about delaying the release of this game if the current generation of console wasn't able to play the game that they were trying to create. A high-level PC will always be able to outplay a good console. That being said, if your game doesn't work on a console, which is going to be in so many homes, then you're not going to release that game. So what happens in the console world does drive, in many ways, what also happens in the PC world, and that's a whole nother discussion. That being said, this 2005 7th generation of consoles, Dolby is at its finest on this console. Dolby has showed up to the video game party, and Xbox 360 has Dolby Digital, PlayStation 3 has Dolby True HD, Nintendo even and the Wii has Dolby Pro Logic 2. So Dolby provides this space, and what Dolby's main objective is to create systems that allow for higher quality audio. And it's the Dolby surround system, for example, that in many ways is responsible for Star Wars in 1977. It's the technology that Dolby puts together that allows for the depth of sound layering that means two key players in the Star Wars world, Ben Burtt, the sound designer, and John Williams, the composer, gets to step into this world and create these massive neo-romantic Wagnerian-style scores with every single little sound fully detailed down to its like tiniest layers, and be able to clearly hear and decipher all of those layers at the same time in a studio that's equipped with that technology. It's so easy to underestimate how crucial that is for the overall Star Wars experience. Of course, special effects took a leap forward with what George Lucas and the Industrial Light and Magic people were doing. And that was also really, really important to Star Wars being the phenomenon that it was. But I would argue that it was at least as important, if not maybe even more so, that Dolby provided the canvas for John Williams and Ben Burtt to work on, and the sound designers who were associated with that, because that was having that Star Destroyer fly over your head in the beginning after that incredible moment of the scrolling type with the story, and then overhead comes that Star Destroyer making sound in space that you wouldn't have heard because it's in space, but who cares? Like all of that cinematic feeling blew people's minds, and it was at least as much, if not more, audio related than visually, or at least as much. And same thing now with video consoles or video game consoles, as we've come to this point now where people like Jeremy Soule and other composers and sound designers can now step into the video game world, and including people like Hans Zimmer, who are writing scores for movies, can step into the video game world in games like Call of Duty and create these epic scores for video games and lose nothing. You can play them through your surround sound systems. You can play them like in your headphones, in video game speakers. The quality of those skyrocket. Like, you're building an entertainment system that you can be completely immersed in. And the majority of that actual immersion around you is sound. And you can do that now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't realize any of that.
Oh, Dolby is... They kind of quietly have been doing this thing that is empowered, at least on the music and audio world, that is really responsible for the ability of musicians to do it, for musicians to do what they do. And it's easy to take for granted until you go into a space where the audio sucks. Or if you spent your whole life in a space where the audio's not great, and then suddenly you enter a space where it's amazing. This is one of the issues with Star Wars. Like, you'd watch it in theaters that weren't wired up for Dolby, and then finally you'd get to a theater that had the full Dolby setup, that theater had paid for the full Dolby setup, and you'd experience Star Wars, and that's when people would go 6, 7, 8 times, like, because there was nowhere else to have that experience, and Star Wars was the first vehicle providing that experience. And then here it is showing up with video games. So I would make a case similar to the case that Dolby and Star Wars unlocked the golden age of 80s and 90s cinema. In many ways, Dolby and Bethesda and Skyrim unlock a whole new, that same world for video games. And in many ways, even though the score for Morrowind is great and the score for Oblivion is great, and they're doing some similar things, the full unlocked and unleashed potential of that is in games like Skyrim. It's just awesome. It's so cool. Is this what makes Skyrim the best 7th generation game? Question mark. Yes, it is.
Spoiler.
Yep. Okay. Anyway, questions about history of audio, setting the stage. It took so long. We're already like 40 minutes into this, and I've only set the stage for what we're about to see, the actual use of this stuff. I gotta like now move and show you how I wanted to show the toys these creators had been given in the audio world, and now I want to show you. Time. Yeah, and now I want to show you playing with them. And it even if it wasn't the first time they had these toys, it was among the first time that they could play with them at the level that they can play with them now. Again, Oblivion. So Bethesda, if we're moving into the first track we're going to move into here is the dialogue track. Just like we're analyzing a movie. Bethesda has already made a habit of casting really excellent voice talent for their movies, or for their for their games. Oblivion is a good example. Patrick Stewart is the Emperor. Sean Bean is one of the main characters. So they've already done this before, but I guess I won't steal the creator's thunder that we're about to talk about. There were some limitations to the number of those that they had used. Now we're moving into a world where the best actors in the industry aren't just like the best composers in the industry are no longer just associating themselves with film. They start to move into video games. And I would love to ask some of them, like, what was your first reaction to being cast in a video game? Like, how do you even talk about being cast into a video game? Like, that's as for respectable actors, like the ones we're about to talk about, like Max von Sydow and Christopher Plummer and Joan Allen and all these guys, like these are highbrow, extremely well trained Shakespearean level actors, similar to what Star Wars did, right? Like all those stories of Alec Guinness, who played the original Obi-Wan, reading the script and being like, what is this trash? The letters that he wrote that was just like, I have to say this stuff. You know, can you believe it? And now, and then I'm sure afterwards, when the checks started coming in, like, yes, I will say more of that stuff. You know, like I think,
sign me up.
Yes, sign me up. I gotta believe there's got to be some of that, because again, they're called games, but these guys are amazing. So anyway, so they've already made a habit of that, but in Skyrim, they double down. Way more actors, way more characters, even more of these really top level actors and characters to provide voices. And I believe this next slide here is actually going to be showing us an example of how they were. This is from a really great behind the scenes video that we'll put the links to this whole behind the scenes video in the show notes, because it's worth watching the whole thing. It's just so interesting. But this is just the section on the dialogue.
We send you to plant some phony evidence in the Mark's house and then tip off the town guard. The rest takes care of itself. Sound like you can handle it?
I think the best NPCs, you can tell a lot about them from the voiceover.
That's Todd Howard, by the way.
I still hear the call of the blood. We all do. It is our burden to bear, but we can overcome.
That little bit of writing and how they say hello is, I think, like one of the hardest things to do.
If it's the war you're referring to, I'm on the side of Whiterun.
You know, in Oblivion, we had like 12 actors. And that was one of the complaints is you walk in Oblivion and you hear a lot of the same voices. So for Skyrim, we want to definitely improve on that dramatically. And we're talking dramatically, like night and day.
I would gladly retire from the world were such a day to dawn.
And this game, we have 70 plus actors doing over 110 roles. A lot more than we've ever had.
You know, it was for about 4 to 5 weeks, 3 voice studios working simultaneously.
Let's see if we can get people trying a quote-unquote Nordic accent. You've come all the way to Skyrim. You're at the tip of the continent here. Guys are big and burly and have beards. The women are big and burly and have beards. And everyone's handy with an axe. And it's a fine line of what sounds good and what sounds like ridiculous.
And so we spent a lot of time casting. We have some great actors.
And I advise you both to listen to what he has to say before you do anything rash.
Joan Allen.
Joan, really cool.
Some of the more specific names joining us on the project: Christopher Plummer, Max von Sydow, Joan Allen, also Linda Carter, Michael Hogan, Vladimir Coolidge.
You're jumping from line to line, and so your emotional states are changing just on a dime.
Good. I can use the practice.
1 minute you're screaming.
Come on, this is our best chance!
The next minute, everything is all fine. And it's fun as an actor to see if you can just hit that moment.
Be careful. The Forsworn are just as dangerous as they look.
Here we go.
Yeah, she's great. Also have Christopher Plummer, who I've wanted to put in a game forever.
You know the ancient Nord word for war? Season unending. And so it has proved.
The voices are all important, of course, in media like this. I've been 60 years in the theater and film, and this is the first video game I've done.
Begone! Before even my philosophy is tested beyond the breaking point. We are men of peace, and you are not.
The process is fascinating, absolutely. So I'm enjoying myself thoroughly.
They were perfect for the part to begin with. And I think everybody had a really good time.
Right on the money. Thank you, sir. And now 22, we're moving on to a different lesson.
No doubt, the appearance of a dragonborn at this time is not an accident. Your destiny is surely bound up with the return of the dragons. You should focus on honing your voice, and soon your path will be made clear.
All right, initial thoughts. Any Did you ever see Christopher Plummer in anything, by the way? So, like, Christopher, my favorite thing, just before you answer that question, like, I grew up with Sound of Music, for example, so he's the main guy in Sound of Music. If you ever watched, like, Star Trek, was it 6, The Undiscovered Country? He's, like, the main villain Klingon in that one. And, of course, but famous for a lot, maybe mostly, for his work on the stage. Just an incredible actor. Max von Sydow, of course, is in the Force Awakens. He's in the beginning of the Force. So, like, in terms of what the nerds will have seen, like, these are all people who've done a lot of really highbrow, amazing theater. I don't know.
Sound of Music, and he was in Knives Out.
Yes, he was. Great show, great movie.
Interesting. Yeah, I love the idea that he's like sitting in his library reading Shakespeare, and he gets a phone call, and they're like, "We would like you to voice. Here's Dragon Scrolls. You need to talk about Dragon Scrolls." And he's like, "Just a second." Puts down Macbeth, and he's like, I just love that. I love that.
I do too.
And he said yes. He did it, and like. That's amazing.
I feel like just the way he says, "This is my first video," like the way he says the word game sounds like it's so hard for him to say.
He's like, "Am I getting this right? Is that what this is?"
And I can't even visualize him ever playing the game. Like, and maybe he did. Maybe that's ageist of me or something. I just can't imagine Christopher Plummer playing Skyrim to ever enjoy the work that he did. And yet there he is. And again, that list of actors, you've got the original Wonder Woman on there, right? You've got, they were going for a depth that only a really good actor can provide. And the benefit from having this audio technology that masks nothing and you can get full range of emotion out of is you can use actors like that. The negative is if you don't, it's going to be exposed, right? If you use lower quality acting and voice work, you're going to know, because all of the gaps in that are going to be exposed.
It doesn't take a great voice actor to make the Yoshi jumping sound from the early Mario games.
Yeah.
But you get, that's interesting.
It's like Walt Disney himself doing the original Mickey Mouse, right? Like that sort of nondescript, high-pitched voice a lot of people can do. But it's different when you move into the much more in-depth characters in the future of Disney movies. You know, that voice acting is a different level. You need Robin Williams to do the genie, you know?
And it's interesting that Bethesda decided, I mean, they shot for the stars. Like they went big, and that they had the funding for that.
Yes.
And that they were like, we're not just going to invest in the graphics quality or the game mechanics. We're going to invest in bringing in the dude who was in The Sound of Music.
I just feel like that must have taken the guts. I don't know.
Man.
Like, I think sometimes, and I still do this to myself, and maybe this is even like the story behind this podcast itself is, you know, we're supposed to be academic and video games are supposed to be like beneath, I don't know, something like, and we just, there's just this pejorative feeling surrounding the idea of a video game. Like they're immature and so I often, part of the reason I just love doing this with you is how fun it is to go, no, look at these things. These are amazing. But for the people out in the world creating them, maybe they don't feel the same level of sort of insecurity that I do still about the wonder that is these video games. I feel like it takes some serious guts for to go out to Christopher Plummer and be like, yeah, we need you in a video game, and to face the potential that he's going to be like, the what? A what? Like you said, I'm going to put down Macbeth and speak this nerdy Dungeons and Dragons. Like that's for a different actor. Like it's George Lucas going to Alec Guinness, right? And he did laugh at it and think it was just, I can, you know, I'll take the paycheck, but this is going to be stupid. This is going to flop. But in this case, they're not even going to know it's you. I didn't know. I've been playing Skyrim for years. I didn't know Christopher Plummer was the voice of that character. And I've played this several times. So you're not only lending your voice and your gravitas to that thing, you're also accepting a certain level of anonymity to do it, and that just, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what there is to even necessarily say about that, except
that's so interesting.
You really have to be in it for a different reason, and those creators have to be in it for a different reason, and they have to have some guts. They have to value the work that they do enough, But that leads to your ability to make an incredible 8-part series like Fallout and get some really great actors to be in it and to now be respected in a way that I think this is maybe one of the reasons why these video game adaptations are working, because you're attracting all of the best, actors and such and creators into that world. Anyway, all right, I don't want to watch this again. Why are you starting again? No, well, can't use technology. There we go. All right, as far as sound design
so cool
goes, this is something we saw Mark Lampert being interviewed in that. I should have pointed him out. He's the main he's in charge of audio design. He also does most of the Foley work. We won't watch all of this video partially for the interest of time, not because the work he does is any less important in terms of the Foley work that he does. But one of the things I did kind of want to show is this is just like a movie in that every single sound that's being made in this world has to be designed and created, right? No, there's no one running through Tamriel with a microphone, recording different,
they should have thought of that.
It probably would have been easier. Really would have made his work easier if someone had simply been.
Mark, we got some ideas for you.
Next time for Elder Scrolls 6, just send somebody with the mic, and if they can survive.
Have you heard of microphones?
If you can survive the first, the first time you go into a dungeon and that first set of traps, if your Foley artist can survive that, horrible, then you're good. Just record it. And if there's more, those guys are a dime a dozen anyway, right? No, incidentally, Foley artists are amazing. They're incredible artists. The guys who think about like the stories of Ben Burt, who is maybe the legendary Foley artist, sound designer, the guy who did all of Indiana Jones and Star Wars and all of those. They are crazy. They're crazy gifted, and they're crazy because they Ben Burt leans over a TV, the old tube TVs with the big magnets in the back, and he's got his recording device on because those guys always have a recording device. They're always just searching for sounds in the world around him. He leans over the TV, and there's this whooshing sound that comes from the magnet into his microphone, and he backs up and he goes, "Oh, lightsabers." And record, next time he leans over, he records it. Those guys, anyway, to make the boulder sound for Indiana Jones, he gets in his little car and has the door open and he's rolling his car down gravel while he holds a microphone out his door next to the wheel onto this gravel, and they're risking their lives to create this audio. So when you move it again, move into this world, you can't just code sound effects. You used to be able to do it, but it was always this conglomeration of weird sampled sounds and stuff. Now you're full on Foley artisting, taking sounds that you record. If I'm going to get a sword to sound cool, and he even mentions, I don't know if we'll get to that part, when you pull a sword out of its, what is it called? A scabbard? The sheath or whatever?
Sheath,
pull it out, it doesn't make that cool metallic swishing sound. So you've got to find a way to invent, sorry if that's if that's ruining anybody's world. They don't make that sound.
Well,
I'm so sorry.
I think I need to take a minute.
They
invent the sound.
That's the thing. If you're like me playing as a kid, you just make the sound yourself. It's like you and McGregor fighting with lightsabers and making the lightsaber sounds, and they couldn't get him to stop doing it when he was dueling with Hayden Christensen. He kept making the sound. Anyway, but Mark Lampert can't do that. So just a little bit about we won't watch this whole thing, but I wanted to watch him create a sound effect or two in this world. These are Game Informer did a bunch of these.
Your audio director and sound designer on Skyrim. I feel like sometimes I'll start out with some idea. Oh, it's some series of movies I've seen. Maybe there's something cold sounding or Nordic. It's cold and rocky and icy. Let's do everything with that in mind. Any wooden kind of sounds you hear, doors, drawers, things you step on, everything is creaky and a little more chewed up and rough than it was in Oblivion. After all the work on Fallout 3, I was mostly just excited to get back to the world of natural sound. It's like, man, I'm done with electronics and everything. I want to get back to like nature recording. Nuclear Wasteland, there's not a lot of bird and insect material that makes a whole lot of sense to use, just kind of blowing wind and sand and everything. I tried to plan ahead. Before Fallout was done, I would just, if I was out and I go hiking, or my parents live in kind of a area in the Appalachian Mountains, so I'll take all the recorders and everything with me and see what I can get. Field recording work is fun too. You're just sitting in the woods, getting eaten by bugs, but trying to be very still with the mics. And I try to put it just over some sort of background hiss or air noise, so I can sort of hear what it's going to be like in context. When I've watched like interviews of sound crews that work on film, they sort of do the same thing. They'll say, yeah, in the beginning, they spend all these, weeks and weeks and weeks going out and gathering field sound for what they think they're going to need. And it's like you go to the grocery and you have all your ingredients for the dinner, and then you try to do with it what you can. All right.
I just want to skip. My favorite, Ben Burt, like creating the sound of the punch in on all the Indiana Jones movies, which is a particularly distinctive sound, the way they punch.
Yeah.
And it's him like slapping lettuce with a sock that's been stuffed with stuff.
Of course it is.
Here's him creating one quick sound.
Right, so this guy here, this is the Dwarven Sphere. Which,
and for those listening, it's all these layers, these digital layers to create this sound.
Kind of armored ball, like an armadillo, and then when the player happens upon him, I like to work with it in sort of 3 layers, like your low frequency, the bass stuff that adds all the sense of weight, something kind of mid-rangey where all the meat of the sound is, and then stuff like this high frequency stuff. It makes it sound clanky and like there are these intricate mechanical parts to him. But this is a sort of iron puzzle where it almost looks like handcuffs. I just thought, well, I should just record it and get all the sounds I can from it, and then maybe one day I'll use it. This is what it started off from, which of course was me just shaking this thing or dropping it into my hand or something like that.
I'll stop it there. It's really what he talks about is all the different layers of metallic sounds he layers together, and then you have the animation for that the dwarves have created all these mechanical creatures in their dungeons, which are really fun creatures to fight or entities to fight. And you take all of this sort of catalog of different metallic sounds, and then he pieces them together to line up with certain aspects of the animation when it opens up, when it closes, when you kill it, when you hit it, and then you have to like do one sound when the weapon that you have is metal hitting against it. You have to do another sound when it's magic hitting against it. And he talks about inventing magical sounds and how hard that is. Like what would a wind spell sound like? You just blow into a microphone? It doesn't really work. And so he has to think through all those different things in the most creative, ingenious ways. These sound guys are wizards.
Fascinating.
So anyway, we could do so much on this. Again, maybe every single one of these things are topics that could take an entire podcast, and we're having enough hard time fitting this into this one. But let's go on. Okay, so last thing we'll talk about in this part of the presentation is just, so we've talked about dialogue, we've talked about Foley. Now it's time to talk about music, which is my favorite part and which I've left not nearly enough time for. But we'll go into we'll take some time.
With that in mind, we need to talk for a second about the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah. Oh, sure. You know what that is, right?
It's the scream that's in every movie.
Yeah, but do you know where it comes from?
I assume Mr. Wilhelm.
Yes.
Saw a spider or something.
No, it's from a pirate movie. And correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is right. Old Errol Flynn movie. A guy named Wilhelm screamed in one of the takes of an episode where he was doing some stunt and made that famous scream. I don't know. It's such a distinctive scream, those Errol Flynn movies were so ridiculously popular. I don't know if it was just a running gag in the beginning that we had to because they're in goofy cartoons of the same time period, and then they just sort of worked their way into every Star Wars movie. So I don't know what it was about that made you then have to keep doing it. that one particular scream, but history was made when Mr. Wilhelm screamed. I'm pretty sure it was an Errol Flynn pirate movie that he screamed. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Private Wilhelm, Charge at Feather River. It's a Western film.
Oh, it's a Western.
Yeah.
Oh.
The character gets shot in the thigh with an arrow.
Oh. It's way off. I feel like my whole world's crashing down. Okay, we got to
So
poor
that's
Wilhelm. Private Wilhelm. I need to go back and do some research then.
Yeah, but it was Private Wilhelm.
What's the
I
movie?
just looked up the Charge at Feather River.
The Charge
a
at Feather River.
1953 Western.
Oh, I thought it was earlier than that.
The scream is believed to be voiced by actor Sheb Woolley.
Interesting. That is not what I remember hearing the first time. Okay, well, we've got to put a pin in that one, and we have to do a whole discussion on the Wilhelm scream. I've not heard it in a video game. Maybe it doesn't make its appearance. It must. It obviously must. It's everywhere. But especially as video games get cinematic, it's got to be in there.
Red Dead Redemption. It's in there.
Of course.
Rayman Origins, Little Big Planet, Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, Grand Theft Auto 4, Halo Reach, Grand Theft Auto 5, The Witcher, Mass Effect.
The Witcher. Oh!
Baldur's Gate 3.
Hey, was just won a whole slew of awards, including was the Game of the Year and all that. Like, Baldur's Gate 3.
StarCraft 2, Battlefront 2.
It's everywhere. There it is.
Speaking of sound design,
yeah,
that I think is just a funny Easter egg that they just reuse it. It's kind of like an inside joke among audio.
I tried to figure out how to do it myself, and I can't. I can't make that sound. It's maybe others have, and maybe others can. I'm sure others can, but it's so distinctive.
Apparently, nobody can because everyone uses
the original.
Sheb Woolley.
Yep,
yeah,
the original, the OG. Interesting. There you go. Wilhelm scream.
Wikipedia also tells me that the dude who recorded that made the sound, also sang the song "Purple People Eater."
What? Oh my goodness! You heard it here, everybody, and read it on Wikipedia. Oh my goodness! Purple People Eaters, the Purple People Eater singer, which is almost as fun to say as Pixel Professor podcast.
Almost.
Purple People Eater. It's missing one more P. Wow.
Hoot Nanny Hoot also sang that song. Shaky Breaky Car.
Shaky, is that the precursor to Achy Breaky Heart?
It actually is a parody of that song.
Oh.
So this dude goes around singing like goofy songs, and then he's in a Western where he gets shot in the leg with an arrow, and now stormtroopers are falling down cliffs.
Yeah.
Making his scream.
His scream. What would that be like? I am the creator. I bet you that man does not get royalties every time someone does the Wilhelm scream. That's unfortunate. Dang.
Okay, but we got it.
No. That's mind blowing and deserves further discovery and digging. Okay, so last bit, which we could spend, and maybe we need to do a whole podcast on Jeremy Soule. That kind of a complicated guy right now in the world of soundtracking, in terms of people wanting to hire him because of some unfortunate allegations, and we won't go into many of those, but they're important. Those kinds of allegations are important to be heard and listened to. But for the purpose of just looking at the music itself, Jeremy Soule is often given was given the sort of title, if you can call it that, the John Williams of music. He steps into this space. John Williams of music? John Williams of video games.
Okay.
This is me trying to go so fast that I'm getting ahead of myself. John Williams is the John Williams of music. The John Video Games of Jeremy of Soule. Yep. Nailed it.
But Bethesda
Games. Audio. Anyway, Jeremy Soule. There he is. That's not him. That's the guy. Jeremy Soule writes these incredible scores. He has yet to write a score that I have not found to be ridiculously moving. That being said, Skyrim might be, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others, his just most cinematic, incredible, amazing work. Like every one of the tracks of this game, and the way those tracks interact with the world itself, and we don't have much time to talk about that specifically. These, of course, are fully orchestrated scores, but designed to interact with the world in different ways. So when you enter certain locations, when an enemy becomes aware of you, often the music will change before you see the enemy. So you'll just be walking unassumingly through nature, and all of a sudden the music changes to Jeremy Soul's battle music, and you know something out there is trying to get you, but you don't know where it is. That's always terrifying. But then just the overall score, the most famous piece being the one that he wrote for the opening of Skyrim, and that's what we'll watch a little bit of, the creation of that opening, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. I've done this piece with my men's chorus, with my tenor bass choir, and oh my goodness, it's epic. So here we go. I'm going to pause it really quick. I should note that theme, that main theme that you hear for Skyrim, that da-na-na, 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 has been around for as long as Jeremy Soule has been doing Skyrim. This version he creates is a specific, for as long as he's been doing the Elder Scrolls. Again, getting ahead of myself. As long as he's been doing that, this version that he does for Skyrim is designed to have a uniquely barbarian feel to it, like Nordic feel to it, and they're going to talk more about that in a second. But here we go.
We don't script the music too heavily to where we're trying to match every moment that the player is doing or anything like that. And it has a weird way of justifying itself to you. You feel like this big sweeping score as I'm rounding this bend and seeing this mountainous valley view is playing for you.
So any questions on the pronunciation? The full quarter note. Let's try it.
We're in a sound stage with a bunch of singers.
I had this idea that the music for Skyrim would be the Elder Scrolls theme, but sung by a barbarian choir. So I called Jeremy Soule, who does our music. I mean, this is in 2006. Jeremy, I hear the Elder Scrolls theme as sung by a barbarian choir. Okay, how are we gonna do that? I don't know. What are they singing? They're singing this song in the dragon language to the theme of Elder Scrolls. Emil Paglarula, senior designer in this game, does a lot of the writing. He's able to come up with things I don't know how he does this. Emil, can you write a song that works in dragon language that rhymes with the Elder Scrolls theme, when translated into English, also makes sense and rhymes? As the story goes, he kind of sat on it for a while and went home one weekend and heated up some mead and wrote the thing. And he came in on Monday, there it is. And it was like, oh my gosh, this actually works.
Or do you want a solid break right here? Let's go ahead and carry it.
Jeremy Soule, his work on the main theme of the game set the tone for the rest of it. And eventually when we went out to Los Angeles to Sony's scoring stage, and then had just a fantastic choir and choir director.
Settle.
And the choir was only made up of about 30 people. And what they would do is just do 3 passes on each verse of the song. Now you've got the sound of 90 people singing this thing in this massive hall. You take a break from it and you come back, you still get the hairs raising on your neck every time they come to the big chorus.
Oh, it's so good. Oh, that's all it was. Oh my gosh. Isn't that's
incredible?
It's so good. And so from the Gesamtkunstwerk angle, and this is where we just kind of, I don't know, wrap up some of this part of the discussion. And there were some other things that I wanted to talk about. Maybe we have just a brief moment to do some of that, but if it'll go to the next slide, which it doesn't want to do. Here we go. There we go. Oh, there it is again. Every time. So best visual artists, the best we have to offer, the best that we have to offer in terms of acting and dialogue, the best we have to offer in terms of the best in terms of current sound design and Foley work. So each one of those tracks, these are people who would be doing it at the best of every level. And now the best in music as well. Jeremy Soule writes in terms of this sort of neo-romantic soundtrack style. And there's a whole discussion to be had about the value of that kind of music in the current world of art, music making and stuff that we won't get into here, at least not yet. But in terms of that kind of writing, that kind of singing as well, we even have that aspect of it. Those singers, that choir is so good. So good. Like, anyway, just the level of art making, and not just in terms of programmers sitting there writing in a programming language, which is also its own, in the right hands, becomes an art in and of itself, right?
Oh, yeah.
All of that comes together to create this thing. That's the wrap up of this initial really way too fast analysis of the presentation. Just the presentation part of this, the sort of cinema part of this. First, just initial reactions, initial thoughts on the presentation part, the cinematic part.
Each element of those things just blows my mind. Yeah. Like, you have a dwarven contraption that needs to be attacked by a wind spell. And so a dude is dropping his keys into his hand. No, his handcuffs into, or his and like, I don't even know how you would think of that.
Yeah.
And then that has to be replicated for every interaction, or every type of interaction, and everything in the world. And then somebody else is like, hey, just imagine barbarians singing in a dragon language, and it sounds like something we've already done, but it also has to work in English.
Yeah.
You have a weekend. See you on Monday. And some dude just goes home and he just does that. And then
I'm sure the mead helped. Heat up some mead, and then that's the only way.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd done cold mead, it wouldn't have worked. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's it's mind-boggling. And then you're like, oh, and don't forget to remind the Sound of Music dude to come to the studio because he needs to talk about Skyrim.
Yeah, and he has to use that dragon language.
Yeah.
And then creating all the different ways you interact with that. Like, one of the coolest ways you interact with those voices, for example, is when you come upon a new dragon shout, which is one of the ways that you use. You're the Dragonborn, and this isn't really a spoiler. It's just part of the mechanics of the game that we'll talk about that move it ahead. Those chanting voices come into your ear, and they start out super soft, just like as a signal, using audio as a signal that's, ooh, one of those is nearby, and you don't know where it is at first. And as you get closer to it, the chanting gets louder and louder and louder and louder until you're completely surrounded by that and the score. So it not only is it there, like, they have ways of actually having it interact and changing seamlessly with the space, getting louder and changing in color and quality and orchestration. And that, to me, is just simply wizardry. Like, that's just phenomenal. But it's not just random people doing the orchestra part or the writing and the composing. These are top level composers and singers and artists and actors and writers. And this is just the movie part. Like, if all they were doing was making a movie, it would be phenomenal. And oh, by the way, we're going to interact with that. Like, it's the ultimate D&D nerds who sit around and go, what if, when you sit down and play D&D and someone turns on some cool music to set the mood, they're like, what if we ask Jeremy Soule to do that for us instead of, instead of us just like making sound effects and using our own voices to create different voices, what if Christopher Plummer comes and does those voices? And instead of just us making spell sounds, what if someone uses this, this technology and exactly. and builds, if you ever look at the layers in a sound designed explosion, there's like sometimes 70, 80, 90, hundreds of layers of different sounds. One of which I read once was they went to a soundstage and dropped a grand piano off of the top of a soundstage. It better have been an old, crappy grand piano, by the way. And it set up a whole array of microphones to capture the sound of that hitting the floor and blowing up, basically. But that was just like one layer of the explosion sound. Anyway, these are our best artists doing the most current things with the best technology, making art.
making video games.
And just so these last questions here are just sort of ones to think about, I guess, moving forward. Like, and we kind of mentioned this just talking about Fallout. Like, and I asked this first question is provocative. This is film a dying art? Is cinema a dying art? The only reason I ask that, I always feel like for me the signal of a dying art is when famous people have to start advocating for you to go see it. So like now when you go to the movie theater, there didn't used to be this, but I don't know if you've seen movies. When you go see Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise comes out in the beginning and goes, "Hey, we sure loved making this movie. Support your local theater and come watch more movies in the theater instead of just at home," kind of a thing. That to me shows that you're losing a battle. There's only one kind of movie that's making money, and that's the kind that, like, you don't go to the movies really anymore to watch romantic comedies, right? Like we used to, because there's no reason to go to a movie theater to watch those, because we have access to so many tools in our homes. So, and now that I can play a game like this, so there is the question, like, if film is dying out, what's going to replace it? And it could just be streaming, which is kind of what's already moving into his place, which is already just a form of cinema, though now the fact that you can make a series that looks better than a movie changes things. But one question I have is, are video games, it says the replacement, or at least a replacement for whatever that void is going to be, if it's going to be there. And I'm sure movies will find a way to, opera's survived-ish. And it's a beautiful, wonderful, incredible, huge art form that still has an audience, but it's a different kind of audience, right? It's a different kind of thing, and it doesn't have the scale that it used to have, which is often a shame. It's Gesamtkunstwerk, at least for the time in which it was in its heyday. And now some of the greatest artists are making opera, but it's a different thing. It's a different kind of thing. Anyway, I don't know. Is film dying, Swyphd? Answer the question. Are video games the future of art?
Absolutely.
They have to be, because we want our podcast to do well. And so if video games suddenly stopped, then it's over.
We could just make the seamless transition to opera.
Yeah. Perfect. I'm sure that's kind of inevitable. Right?
Same audience.
Yep. Nope.
My big takeaway from this is that video games are a waste of time. Done. That it's people thoughtlessly just kind of create these video games, and you get nothing out of them. There's no like positive side of video games. It's just something you do in your basement, preferably your parents' basement.
Yes, definitely.
And
with empty pizza boxes surrounding you, and empty soda cans, and heated up mead, drunken heated mead, spilled
heated
everywhere
up mead on your keyboard, and Cheetos on your.
That's all video games
mustache.
are. They're just big corporations trying to take your money without any thought about the art form.
Yep.
No.
So don't play video games.
That's the message today, especially not Skyrim.
That's the takeaway.
Yeah.
Don't listen to the Foley artists who would have you think that there's depth. No.
No way.
Nuh-uh.
And that's the fun thing about all this is it's such a surface scratch. Really, like, there's just all of these were excerpts. I watched so many hours, the nerd that is me, of behind the scenes footage, everything that I could find, and then later interviews. And we're going to watch a little bit of some of those as we move into the next stage of this development. Again, now we've got all these tools. We've set up the technology. We've set up the cinematic tools at their disposal. We haven't even really talked about yet how they're going to use them in a game setting. We've only talked about what the toys are. And it's incredible artists, and it's incredible actors, and it's amazing art, and it's a new creation engine-ish, or at least the early stages of a new creation engine. So it's Dolby, it's all these possibilities. Now we have to add now it's not a movie, so we have to add mechanics to it. We have to add a gaming system to it, and there's key decisions that go into now whether or not we're going to keep you in flow. One of which was discussed even briefly, this idea that when you approach an NPC, he's got to catch your attention or you're not going to ever be interested in his quest. And he talked about how that first line of dialogue is so key. But then again, like leveling up What is that? How does it work? Like pacing, like how do you interact with the world? We've talked about the tools to create the world. Now we have to make it. You know,
how do you balance challenge and ability?
That's right.
How
and if you could do all of that. You could spend so much time and effort in getting the best minds in the industry to create this amazing thing, and then sink the whole thing by getting the mechanics wrong. Right? So these key decisions that are now to come. That's next.
Wow. So
any final thoughts here? Swyphd?
I want to hear the next episode.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
I do too. I guess I'm gonna hear it as I give it.
Well, that's true.
That's true. Which I'm happy to do. Which I'm happy to see you react to. We've had this idea of having you play this game and having us somehow have the opportunity to watch you play it for the first time. I'm just curious if we're setting this game up to be like an incredible first time experience for you, or if you're going to be like, oh, I thought you said this was good. Like, ew.
You guys like this game?
Yeah. Anyway.
I mean, there's a whole series of video games that I now need to play, including Fallout.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
I have not. Actually, the closest interaction I've ever had with the game was at Target. They sell, years ago, I saw like a Fallout themed water bottle. And I was like, oh, that looks cool. And then I looked it up and I was like, I've never played that game. I'm not going to.
But I can tell you, I now want that water bottle because I've never seen it.
It was cool.
And I did not have that interaction, and now I want to have it because I love Fallout. That game.
That's it. That's my experience.
I have a Fallout chess set that I love.
I want that.
Yeah.
Trade you.
Yeah.
Water bottle for a chess set.
There you go.
Yeah, man.
Well, we have work to do. We have games to analyze and to get excited about, and this game has so many pieces. So anyway, do all the things. Now it's time to help get the word out there. These games deserve to get. I don't know. These games deserve to be appreciated on a deeper level. They're not just. More than just scratching the surface and picking up a controller. I feel like there's a richness that you can have aesthetically and artistically.
Amazing.
Consuming these games that when it's more fully understood, it's again just like listening to a symphony or listening to an opera that's wonderful, and they gain a deeper meaning when you understand a little bit about what's going on. I think people need to know. So like and subscribe and share and leave us a comment. Are there other games that you feel like deserve this kind of treatment? Do you like this style of treatment of these games? Because I could do this all day, but I'm curious to see what you think, audience out there. And yeah, let's get the word out. Please help us. I think there's a lot more to be said and discussed, and plus I just really like having an excuse to do it, whether or not anyone's listening to it.
Me too. I'm listening.
Good. That's all that matters.
I'm subscribed. I'm sharing.
Yes.
Oh, I need to do a better job of sharing.
Oh, it's gonna happen. Just you wait.
We'll get there.
All right. Well, guys, go out there, play some games. Bye, everybody.